Spiders, snakes, worms, bats, and way more animals that I can't even start to list. These are just a few of the interesting creatures that Chinese people eat quite normally. Often considered to have the richest cuisine in the world, Chinese cuisine can indeed combine things you wouldn't even imagine in your wildest dreams into meals. I bet some of you might wonder, why? Were there no decent foods left that these guys had to resort to eating these? Actually, there's a much deeper and sadder reason behind it. I guess it's impossible for people like us to understand, because none of us have ever been forced to eat our dead family members. Despite enduring major calamities, China's population remains significantly larger than other countries. The exact reason for this might be unclear, but we can make some educated guesses. China is one of the world's largest countries, blessed with incredibly fertile lands. Plus, thanks to its diverse climate, agriculture has always played a key role. This fertility has meant food production and population growth have always been higher than its neighbors. However, while a large population brings many advantages, it's also been like a double-edged sword hanging over the country. Well managed, it's a massive strength, but the slightest misstep could lead to self-destruction. So, how have the Chinese managed this massive population for thousands of years? The answer is simple: food management and the strict enforcement of authoritarian systems with an iron fist. Especially peasants were seen almost as robots, and throughout Chinese history, we can see instances where peasants were given production quotas, dictating exactly how this was enforced. Villages and peasants subjected to these quotas, if unable to meet the state's demanded production, were either punished or had their allocated shares reduced. This often led to many deaths. As a result, peasants had to work frantically just to survive. This management style has been a force throughout the ages, threatening the Chinese people with starvation to coerce them into work and obedience. Now, you might ask, why do these people accept such oppressive governance? This is where it gets really interesting. Looking at Chinese history, yes, we see some rebellions. However, compared to revolutionary movements in other countries, these have generally been less effective, and the harsh oppression of peasants has always continued. Although this theory hasn't been fully scientifically proven, some researchers argue that there's a link between societies' diets and their propensity for rebellion and war. For example, it's suggested that societies with a diet heavy in red meat are more warlike and aggressive, whereas agricultural societies with less access to red meat, consuming more vegetables and legumes, have a lower desire to fight and rebel and are more obedient. So, how do we relate all of this to the present day? Rightfully so, thousands of years have passed. Technology has advanced. Food production has increased. Some of you might ask, why do these people still behave as if they're emerging from famine? What kind of hunger is this? Here, we come to the psychology of the Chinese people, and, in my opinion, an event that completely overturns all ethics and empathy, the Great Mao Famine. This period stands as one of the most tragic events in Chinese history, resulting in the deaths of millions of people. Radical agricultural policies and industrial projects implemented by the Chinese government failed to achieve the expected yields, leading to widespread famine across the country. This famine left deep scars in the collective memory of the Chinese people, and even today, concerns about food security and famine continue to affect the psyche of the populace. Despite advancements in technology and food production today, it can be said that these past experiences have shaped the Chinese society's perspective on food, agriculture, and life in general. This may provide an explanation as to why the Chinese people sometimes behave as if they've just emerged from famine. because past traumas have left deep imprints on the collective consciousness and influenced societal behavior patterns. This phenomenon also manifests itself in government policies and certain preferences in the daily lives of the people. Mao Zedong is considered one of the most egotistical individuals in history and serves as the prime example of the consequences that can arise from empowering an egotistical dictator with great powers. Rising to leadership of the communist forces during the Chinese Civil War in 1921, Mao subsequently established the People's Republic of China with the communist victory in 1949 and governed the country until 1976. In 1958, Mao initiated the period known as the Great Leap Forward, aiming to abandon the old culture and create a new industrialized China. However, despite appearing as a commendable initiative from the outside, the reality was quite different. Mao, driven by this obsessive fixation, established industrial cities and communes. People working in these communes lived in state-controlled factories with the sole purpose of working in the factories. Payments were made with enough food to sustain their lives, while those unwilling to work were often assigned to tasks like factory cleaning or strenuous labor. Additionally, similar to slave agricultural communes, where food was used as payment for labor, were established and unimaginable production quotas were imposed. Mao wanted the people to focus solely on two areas: industrial production and food production. To erase everything else from the people's memory, he initiated a movement called the Cultural Revolution in 1966. This movement aimed to completely sever the ties between the Chinese people and their past. Consider this: we're talking about one of the oldest and most significant ancient civilizations in the world. A civilization that has literally shaped history with its inventions, a highly important historical civilization. However, Mao's aim to erase this memory under the guise of modernization is a very tragic situation. Under Mao's rule, those who engaged in handicrafts from the old culture and anyone found with a historical artifact at home were sent to labor camps and worked to death. Craftsmen had their hands cut off, while adherents of Confucianism and any other belief were killed. During this period, all temples related to ancient Chinese philosophy were attacked. Many were demolished, and the ancient texts within were burned. Can you imagine targeting people's past, beliefs, and values, essentially their identities, and doing so even among fellow Chinese? This is one of the darkest periods in Chinese history and illustrates the savage face of Mao's totalitarian rule. It's unimaginable, isn't it? Astonishing production quotas, pressure on people, the gradual destruction of culture, and a path with an uncertain destination. The cup had been filled to the brim, ready to overflow. Wouldn't you agree? However, this overflow didn't come from what you might think. It wasn't due to the Chinese people saying enough is enough. Chinese people generally don't rebel much. The final straw came from a different source: sparrows. We're in the period when Mao saw himself as a deity, back in 1958. A simple observation catches the attention of this ignorant megalomaniac and his entourage. They notice sparrows eating the grain spilled on the ground. Making an extremely simplistic inference, they think sparrows eat grain. So, these sparrows will also eat the grains in the fields, and we won't reach our quotas. Events escalate from here. It couldn't have been more foolish, could it? But it happened, and indeed, the now robotized Chinese populace eagerly carried out this order. Tens of millions of birds were slaughtered, and this event was celebrated as a great success. However, following this inhumane massacre, a terrifying consequence emerges. It's said that there was a slight increase in production in the first harvest after the killing of the birds, but this increase is minimal. While Mao and his cabinet see this as a positive development, hoping for further increases in the future, a different problem arises. An event reminiscent of the Bible and Torah occurs. an endless invasion of locusts and insects. With the natural predators of insects, the birds, eradicated nationwide, insects multiply abnormally. This situation leads to an excessive proliferation of mice as well, and they invade the country. This devastation is of unimaginable proportions. They attack and consume everything, from crops in the fields to products in the warehouses. China starts importing millions of sparrows from its neighbor Russia, but it's too late. The agricultural production system has collapsed, and the food chain has been shattered. This affects millions of workers in the industry and turns the country into a hellish landscape. As the food crisis deepens, the Mao regime begins to disregard rural people. Importantly, the basic food imports from Russia increase, but this food is brought in more to maintain order in the cities. Consequently, this chain of events turns China, home to approximately 800 million people at the time, into a hellish landscape. People begin consuming wildlife out of desperation before hunger strikes. Over time, both animal husbandry and natural habitats reach the brink of collapse. This consumption isn't a pleasant process of hunting, cleaning, cooking, and eating. We're not talking about a few individuals here. We're talking about millions of people fighting for survival. According to the testimonies of those who survived the horror years of the 3-year famine, when the devastation of the years reached its peak, people would tear apart any living creature they found in the wild, devouring them raw, like wild animals right there on the spot. There was no opportunity to clean and cook. Wasting time means others seeing and stealing from you, the survivors describe. When animals became depleted, what do you think happened next? People started eating insects, grass, weeds, tree bark, and even mud in succession. Listen, I can see the grimaces on all of your faces right now, and you're probably saying, God forbid, that's a terrible thing. However, the events haven't even reached their peak yet. Years ago, I watched a video. I searched for the woman's interview, but couldn't find it. However, I'll share what stuck in my mind. She was a survivor and owed her survival to her mother. In her interview, she said, "I was a little girl back then. Food was very scarce in our village. My mother told me to eat her if she died. Eventually, they tore apart and ate my mother. Mao didn't just take our families from us. He also shattered our humanity. Animals, plants, insects, mud, and even dead humans were consumed in succession until there was no food left for anyone or anything to eat. During this period of great famine that lasted for 3 years, it's estimated that more than 60 million people died, according to current estimates. Now you know why the Chinese resorted to eating everything. But this is not just a result of past trauma. It's also connected to future food crises. Climate change and excessive demand have made it difficult for China to meet its food production needs. Particularly in recent years, droughts and water shortages have severely impacted agricultural production. It's expected that this situation will affect around 900 million people in the coming years, a significant portion of China's population. Moreover, this isn't just affecting a few regions. It's affecting the entire country. Can China overcome this problem? It seems very challenging. Especially with industrial growth and environmental destruction, water sources are becoming contaminated, and arable land is disappearing. If you disrupt the balance of nature, you'll face the consequences. So, what will happen in the future? As climate change and droughts increase, how will millions of people survive? We need to think about these questions. It's also an important question to consider how the Chinese will view future resources or who they will turn to for food. In your opinion, how can future food shortages and crises be addressed? You can share your ideas in the comments.